Hello there, and welcome to this video showing you 7 ways you can be better at every racing game you play. Now, these tips start at absolute beginner level and get more advanced as they go, so there should be something here for most racing game fans, perhaps barring the likes of Jimmy Broadbent. But if, like Jimmy, you are an expert, feel free to leave your own tips in the comments. So here we go. Number 1. Learn how to crash. This is the most important thing a beginner can learn because everyone crashes at some point, even the professionals. So my first tip here is to crash in the best way possible. If you realize you're about to crash, you need to accept that fact and then do so as sympathetically as you can. So rather than continue to steer in vain as hard as you can away from the wall, actually try steering towards it slightly so that your car lines up with the wall and bangs both wheels evenly against the barrier. Now, the reason for doing this is simple. If you hit the wall with one corner of your car first, so either the back or the front first, that will likely put your car into a spin after impact. And of course, if you're then facing the wrong way, you'll lose time as you have to turn the car around. The other thing to do, once you've actually steered the car into the wall in a nice sympathetic manner, is to straighten up the steering. So that means letting go of the left stick if you're using a control pad. Why? Because if you're still turning as you hit the wall, you're likely to bounce off in that direction as your car regains traction. That's why you'll see some novices just zigzagging down the track, hitting the left barrier, then the right, then the left again, in a never-ending cycle of failure. If they just let go of the steering sooner, they'd find themselves pointing the right way. Now, before we move on, just to let you know, in some games like Forza 7, crashing well isn't always possible because the game simulates squashy tyre barriers that catch your car and push it back out onto the road. Now, if that's the case, it's a better idea to just not crash into the wall in the first place, which brings us nicely onto tip number 2. Use the brakes. Somebody once asked me how I got so fast at racing games, and I jokingly replied, just don't brake as much. But actually the opposite is true. Using the brakes wisely is absolutely the best way to get faster lap times in racing games. Slower in often means faster out, and if you carry speed onto the straight after the corner, that's more valuable than just going into the corner faster. So you need to see the corner coming up, perhaps by looking at the track map or chevrons at the side of the road, or by learning it perhaps, and then slow the car down before you get to the corner itself. Now, most modern games have got the brakes mapped to the left trigger, so let go of accelerate on the right and give the brakes a gentle but long squeeze. Brake in a straight line where possible and get the car down to a decent speed. Just remember to let go of the brakes once you have slowed down, otherwise you will stop, and stopping on the track is a bad idea, so don't do that. Now that you're going slower, you'll find you can turn the car much more easily around the corner, and then you can get the car going faster again with accelerate. So slow in, fast out, that's usually the best way to tackle a corner. Number 3, push forward on the analog stick. On a control pad, racing games almost universally use the left stick for turning left and right. But the stick doesn't just give you hard left, hard right, or straight like games did in the 80s and 90s. They've actually got everything in between, just like a steering wheel. Problem is, even the tallest sticks like an N64 stick can be hard to use if you want to access those fine nuances of control that exist between the extremes. So you can give yourself some more accuracy by holding the stick forwards. It's like pushing up, and then rotate it around in a semicircle. Modern pads are very smooth at doing this, whereas GameCube or something is a bit more angular. So here, take a look at the difference in how the car in Daytona USA HD moves on the left with normal stick use, that's just pushing it left and right, compared to the smooth driving on the right using my method of holding the stick forwards. You don't have to hold it in the up position on the straights if you don't want to, but if you're learning this technique, perhaps it's actually a good idea to do that because you'll then get a feel for where the extremes are and get used to doing it. Now, I should point out that this technique doesn't work in every single game. For example, if you're playing Wipeout, that also has nose up and down controls mapped to the stick as well. So obviously if you keep holding up, then you're going to be putting the nose of your craft into the floor. But 95% of racing games do benefit from using this technique. You'll also find that gradually turning the car's wheels upsets it far less, resulting in less skidding and more responsive, controllable driving. Now, one more tip before we move on, Do occasionally take a look down at your steering thumb, especially if your car doesn't appear to be turning properly, because you might find you're pulling down on the stick instead of turning right. The car turns hardest left and right at the 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock positions if you think of the left stick as a clock. Pulling downwards to 6 o'clock is like not turning the wheel at all. Now, I've seen people do this. They've been able to turn left, but not to turn right because they're pulling downwards, so make sure you don't do the same. Number 4, be gentle. So, I just mentioned about upsetting the car, and it's true, being gentle with your control inputs will make your lap times absolutely tumble. Now, it might feel cool to force your car to turn in at 100 miles an hour, tyres screeching and clattering over the curbs, but you'll often get much better exit speed and definitely have fewer accidents if you work within the limits of your car. In fact, laps that feel slow are often faster than the ones where you are on the ragged edge. So perhaps the most useful thing to remember is that while the car is skidding, it's impossible to transfer the full power of your acceleration to the wheels, or indeed to achieve the full turning angle of your car. So unless you're playing a rally game or an arcade game like Outrun 2 where power drifts are king, skidding is usually bad. And the same goes for accelerating and braking. If you go from no throttle to full throttle at low speed without feeding in the power gently by slowly squeezing the trigger, you're likely to spin the wheels because they've got too much power. And spinning wheels don't grip the track, and so you are likely to spin as well. And of course, as for braking, in a real car, if you come up to a roundabout, nobody slams their foot on the brakes right to the floor as they approach, do they? You want to keep the car settled and do it as gently as possible. So be precise but fair with what you're asking the car to do. You're the one driving, so it's up to you to keep the car under your control. Be gentle. Number 5, learn the racing line. So the most important thing that you can learn after you've learned to control your car properly is how to drive around the track in the quickest way possible. Now, I remember when I was a really young boy, I was watching the Grand Prix on the TV, and I asked my dad why the Grand Prix cars didn't steer around the whole of the corners, because at the chicanes, they were turning a little left, then a little right. And he told me it's because it's the fastest way around the corner, and that's to go as straight as possible. Turning more would take longer and be slower, and it's a race. Now, while there are some exceptions to this rule, it's definitely true that learning the out-in-out racing line I'm about to show you will make a novice drop tens of seconds from their lap times. Not tenths of a second, tens of seconds. So, using what we've learned so far, let's take a look at an example corner. For a simple right-hand corner like this one, you see it coming up and approach on the outside of the corner, so the left-hand side here. Don't put your wheels actually on the grass or off the track because that might upset it, so just try and get near the edge but not over it. Now gently apply the brakes in plenty of time to slow down without skidding, so don't push too hard and lock them. Then when you've slowed down enough, gently steer the car towards the inside or apex of the corner. Give the apex a metaphorical kiss as you go by, and then gently and progressively apply the accelerator again. So that's squeezing the right trigger just enough to get the car to naturally move back across the track to the left-hand side on the exit. So that's outside, inside, outside, or out, in, out. When you get this right, it not only feels good, but it looks amazing, and your lap times will plummet. And remember, you want your car to be at its fastest as you leave the corner to carry that speed onto the straight beyond. Slowing down when you're almost through the turn to make sure that you turn it will make your lap time slower as your car has lost speed going onto the straight. So if you decelerate by 10 miles an hour, that means that someone else will be going 10 miles an hour faster than you and they could just breeze straight by. Number 6, learn your braking points. When you get a little better, you might find that you're actually slowing down too much or too early for some corners. If you crash on the outside of a corner, chances are you're going too fast into it. So that's when you need to start learning your braking points, by which I mean look at the side of the track or even the surface of the track. Now this might be a certain dark grey polygon in Virtua Racing or the 100-meter board in Assetto Corsa. In fact, in a lot of racing sims, the 100-meter board and the 150-meter board if you're at full speed are usually good bets for slowing down in time for the next corner. Now, once you've tried it once, you can then try braking a bit later or a bit earlier, depending on how good your car felt the lap before, and also adjust the point at which you start to turn in. Now, after several laps and practicing this, you'll start to master the corner. Now, if you're still not quite sure how you should be doing this, a lot of modern racing games give you an ideal trajectory line that you can follow and switch off when you're happy, which also tells you where you should brake and for how long. Now, although this is a really good way to learn the tracks, I always switch this off because while it is good for getting the right idea of how you should be driving, it never actually gives you the fastest time, as this line is actually pretty conservative. They want you to be able to get around the corners, so they make you go a little slower than you actually need to. So once you've got the basic idea, switch it off and then learn it properly. I do hope you found this video useful, and I also hope you'll consider hitting like and subscribe, and please do check out my channel for more gaming videos, as well as music videos, gear reviews and more. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you soon. Cheers.